This is Morten from Inkish. Chica and I and Jack and Pat, we are in Las Vegas for the Connect event. And beside all the, I think it's more than 100 breakout sessions that talks about all the software and all the combination of software, there's also quite a few partners here. And one of them is Dominic from Carbon Quota.
How are you?
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
All the way from the UK to here.
Yes. Only slightly jet lagged.
Did you measure your own carbon quota going here? Or?
I do. We measure it every single year.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we spoke about just before we turned on the camera that actually one of the reasons why you are a little bit hesitant is basically legislation for once is a little bit behind what you want, because what you do is helping companies getting things under control on how much they actually consume, right?
Yeah, it is. It's one of the things that we suffer from is that governments do things and then they put things on hold and then they say they're going to start them again and they put them on hold again. But as we were saying just now, that what we need is a force within the world to help organisations in our sector, in the print and packaging sector, to move forward. So, and EcoVadis is stepping into that world now, which is good news. Science Based Target Initiative is stepping into it. So we've actually seen quite a big increase of business despite governments not getting their act together.
We also spoke about that. It's actually quite interesting because the legislation goes toward that every company needs to be able to account for their footprint. When you look at Carbon Quota as a company, you have got quite a lot of attention from the industry during the past couple of years. You could sell your services to any industry, basically, right?
Yep, I could, and we need to be very careful not to, because the industry that we're in, and I cover packaging and print, and all segments of packaging and print, is very big, as we know, right? We've both been in the industry many, many years. So we deliberately focus on our sector because our customers want that expertise. I come from a packaging background, so it really helps when you can talk the language around materials and machines and converting and fabrics and et cetera, you talk that language. Plus we know that the data we've got, Morten, is by far the best data in the industry because we specialise. That doesn't mean I won't move to another segment at some point in the future, but right now we've got enough to do.
And I would say that, what is really, what caught attention to me was that there's a lot of people that have tried to make, let's say, manually input solutions to actually calculate your carbon footprint.
And they still continue to do that.
Yeah.
Yep.
But one of the really big things is you can basically connect to all the data that is already available from utility providers and more like paper merchants and things like that. Tell me a little bit about the ecosystem with Carbon Quota.
So I guess now we're in our 5th year, I think. We've spent that 5 years working with the merchants, the people that make raw materials, the manufacturers, the machines, all of that work's been done, and we've got that data now, and that database is by far the richest database of what are called emission factors. So the beauty of us understanding the sector is that when you take, for example, a sheet of paper is different in every single mill. So you need to be able to understand that a mill in Sweden is different to a mill in Canada. And it may be the same paper, but it has a different carbon footprint. So we've collected that data, and you're absolutely right, we spent many years doing that. And then we allow that data to be pushed through things like Radius and Pace and Technique and Tharstern. And that's why we're at the Connect event, because all that data is now fed into their MIS ERP applications.
So does that mean that, for example, if you're graphic communication customer using Pace, for example, that basically when you give a quote, you can basically add your exact carbon footprint on that particular job right away?
Exactly that. And they don't need any training. They don't need any expertise. It's part of the workflow that exists already. So if you're using Pace or Tharstern or Technique, one of the biggest questions we always get asked is, how do I calculate it? The answer is, well, you don't. All the technology and the development that we've done with, the graphic solutions people and the EPS guys. We've done all that development, the hard work, and it literally just appears within the system.
If I should be the devil's advocate for a second, what happens if, I mean, let's say that you give a quote to a customer that is very environmentally concerned, right? And they want to be very accurate in the things. Is there like space for error margins in the service you provide, or is it accurate enough to count on? Or
well, it's accurate based on the estimate.
Yeah.
Now, one of the better question is what happens in production. So often you estimate a job and that doesn't really reflect what happens on machine.
could be more or less paper. It could be more hours, less hours.
The machine
basically.
could break down,
Yeah,
for
yeah,
example.
yeah,
Heaven forbid, but it happens. So, but we actually carbon footprint at both stages, at the estimate stage and at the production stage. Now, from a quality point of view, we also have a very high threshold of quality, and if we receive data that is weaker or incomplete, we do not carbon footprint. And that's the important part here.
Yeah, because that basically means that if you don't have sufficient data to give an accurate answer, then you just don't give an answer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We actually send a message back and say we cannot carbon footprint because data is missing. And that's very important. To your very point, you do not want to give out a carbon footprint that's incorrect. Yeah.
Another question that I guess also could be landing on your desk from time to time, if you use your tool Carbon Coder to give an idea on your footprint. We spoke about earlier today that offsetting is not the solution because it's basically, it can be a hoax, it can be inaccurate, it can be whatever. What is the solution? Because now you know, then what? I know that is not a service that you offer, but
no,
I mean,
it's not. It is a solution, okay, but it's not the solution. I think the solution to global warming is measure, reduce, measure, reduce, measure, reduce. Now, if you use high quality offsetting during that journey, absolutely right. But what we see a lot of is people jump straight into offsetting and they're not measuring properly and they're not trying to find a way to reduce because they've satisfied their need by going, I paid $100 to buy some carbon credits. Do you see? It's just, so it has a place in the world, of course it does, but it's always about reduction, the journey, measure, reduce, measure, reduce. And eventually you'll get to the place where we have a very low carbon industry.
And I guess that when you say what you do is also because I know that European legislation is now being even stronger, focusing on greenwashing, and I guess that I guess it's tremendously important for you as a company to be sure that you're not seen as a greenwashing product, but that you basically serve scientific-based, accurate data that can help.
It's critical, Morten. We've actually resigned customers because they've taken our data and they've created a greenwash story. Okay. I'm not going to tell you who they are, but that's how important it is.
But they're green.
No, they weren't green. They weren't, and then they were pretending they were green.
Sorry, it was a stupid joke.
No, it was a good joke. No, it is a very serious. We take it very seriously. It's actually in our contracts. Our contracts with our customers, we have a clause that talks about you cannot manipulate, data or numbers. It's a really important point.
And of course, the reason why I'm asking all these, let's say, questions is I'm sure that you have things under control, but I'm just also sure that sometimes a brand would like to be associated with the Carbon Quota, because basically if you give accurate data and they can offset, then they can basically do nothing, right?
Yes, that is true. That is true. I think back to your point on greenwashing is an interesting one, because we see less since the Green Claims Code and all of those worries that come into the industry. The brands are really careful about what they do. The converters, transversely, are less careful, which is really interesting. And I see a lot of this when I go to shows. We see each other at many shows around the world. And you can walk into a show and you can see businesses that claim to be green, or this product's sustainable, or this product's low carbon. If they can't substantiate that, they shouldn't be saying it. But it exists quite heavily in the industry. But if they are printing or making product for a brand, those brands will clock that, yeah, and they won't accept it because it is greenwashing. And it's probably not a deliberate thing, if I'm honest. All they're doing is creating a marketing message that says this thing's green. Why is it green? Is that's the point to it. So there's a difference between how brands see greenwashing and how converters see greenwashing.
On a little higher scale, we are now in the US, where the government has withdrawn from IPPC. Is that something that, I mean, of course, I think it should concern the whole world, but as such, is that something that concerns you or is it just giving a new market opportunity in the US?
Great question. When it happened, we had to take a step back. Obviously, I run the business, right, with my partner, but we had to take a step back. But the reality is, we have not seen a downturn in requirement. And our reasoning to that is, if you're printing or producing goods for Amazon, for Lego, for Procter & Gamble, or Unilever,
they have the same requirements
they
anyway.
haven't changed their requirements. So if somebody in a political role has an opinion, it doesn't change how the brands behave. And ultimately, the printing sector services big brands, 9 times out of 10. So it's what they require is driving the behaviour, not what happens in the political landscape. Of course, it slows it down a little bit,
because I was thinking, and this is nothing to do with carbon quota, but maybe something that I would like you to think about anyway, because I actually read into the Nordic Ecolabel and to the European flour. And basically, there's nothing that is a requirement that it should be a European printing company. It could be an American printing company. Have you ever thought about working together with, let's say, so you become part of the, I wouldn't say a part of the ISO standards, but maybe more part of the evaluation standards that is required in order to be like Nordic Swan, for example, right? The reason I'm asking is just because I think that I know a lot of American printing companies that have spent a lot of time and energy creating and developing green products, wind turbines, low energy facilities, etc. And now they are kind of left in a vacuum where maybe they don't know what to do, basically.
Yeah, I think a good example of that is the ISO standards, especially the 14,000 range, the environmental standards. Part of that is you've got to measure your carbon. So
you just become a tool in a standard that already exists.
Part of that world. The same with EcoVadis. EcoVadis covers a whole raft of ESG, categories, but carbon's one part of that. And actually, when you do a deeper dive on EcoVadis, you've got to measure your carbon. You've got to have a third party that measures your carbon to be able to progress from gold to silver. So we do work with them indirectly. And, lots of customers come to us because they've got a requirement for X, Y, or Z. So because there's massive overlap on these things.
Fantastic. I learned. Thank you very much.
Enjoyed that. Look, good to see you.